same spiel. I can't do the same thing 2 times in a row. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who is in Miami today in a darkened room, who is living his best life after the Cape Beach tournament down there. And then to the namesake of the site, and also one of the best people we have in DFS, Alex Osmo Baker. How are you doing, Alex?
Man, I'm feeling weird. This is almost like deja vu here. Anyway.
Oh, we're going now. We are going. So we did it.
Yes. All right. Well, yeah, it's going well. I mean, Miami, I'm starting to realize why James Harden has a tough time playing here. Or is it does he play better in Miami? I'm struggling to remember, but anyway, a really good time out in Miami, of course. It's pretty hot. Like I noticed that immediately upon arrival. Yeah, but I'm excited to talk some Week 12 here.
Yeah, it's very sunny down there. A lot of vitamin D in your life, and also the home of a running back who you didn't give me the transition this time, who is one of the apples of the eye of our guest this week, at Peter Overzet on Twitter, better known as the Mans. Does a Swolecast, does a lot of content for 4for4 as well. How are you doing, Pete?
I'm doing good, guys. I'm excited. The chat already seems to be tilting about talking about Patrick Laird, but I'm going to tell you guys right now, we're not even going to talk about it that much because he's moved into the chalk range. Alex told me to get ready with some contrarian plays. I see his ownership skyrocketing into the double-digit percentages, so you guys don't have to worry. No Laird talk today.
And no Laird talk, I'm sure, other than all the Laird talk will force you to do, because you got to live up to your shtick, Pete. That's the one thing we demand out of everybody here. But as always, we appreciate you coming on. And, you're doing a lot of different things. You do some a little bit, I would say, character-y work, but you're also a guy who knows the industry pretty well. So what should people expect from you if they go follow you on Twitter at Peter Overzet?
Yeah, so I've been making a lot of videos this year for Roto Grinders. I've been doing this bankroll challenge, which I started with $1,000 each week, playing a $100 single entry tournament, normally the SPY on DraftKings. And I have learned that I'm not good at it. So that's kind of an issue. I'm down to my final $100. And I was in Mexico last week for the game, and Frisco Josh, a previous On the Contrary guest, was there. And we ended up talking, and he challenged me to a head-to-head GPP for my remaining $100. So this week, all of my efforts are going to that. Our lineups are locked. You can find that on my Twitter. And yes, Patrick Laird is in that lineup. So I have actual American US dollars resting on Patrick Laird's performance this week.
Hey,
what spurred on the challenge? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Alex. But what spurred on the challenge between you and Hermsmeyer?
Well, it was just that, the SPY on DraftKings is generally 3,333 people. I got to finish in the top 700 to min cash. I thought, why don't we do a little smaller GPP here as a head-to-head? So Josh presented a nice opportunity. As Alex will know, Josh famously does not play DFS, does not like skin in the game. And I said, I found my mark. I found my fish. I'm going to double up through Frisco Josh.
So, Alex, what did you want to ask?
Yo, Peter, I mean, you're selling yourself short here because, of course, Peter is the creator of the first physical cryptocurrency, the Mans coin, I believe. And do you have any of these Mans coins riding on the outcome of this?
Yeah, my business partner / associate, he did invent the world's first physical cryptocurrency, Mans coin, and it is pumping. As of yesterday, the on ramps, the channels, they were seeing a lot of movement, a lot of high volume. So yeah, there are still a few Mans coins. I can show you what they look like right here. I mean, personally, to me, they're a nice paperweight. He says it's the future of monetary currency. So, I mean, it's up to you to choose who you believe, but yeah, they're there.
Buy when China buys the Mans coin. That's what I would do. Just follow their lead. They seem to know all the
actually, you kind of inspired me to come up with my own currency here. And this is kind of a throwback to the poker days, but it's called a Sklansky buck. And what it is you get them when you have EV. So, like, if you run badly, you're like going to still have a lot of Sklansky bucks. And Peter, man, I'll tell you, you're Sklansky rich here because last week you played this lineup in the Millionaire Maker: Matt Ryan, McCaffrey, Ronald Jones, Sanders, Julio, Ridley, Traquan Smith, Ebron, and the Vikings. It sounds familiar, I'm sure. You finished 10,361st, so not a great showing, but I actually had it graded out as the best lineup. You played the best plays, like you're claiming, and you have so many Sklansky bucks in your balance here. It's almost 200,000 by my count.
So the Skalansky box is kind of like a regression tool, right? That I'm just bound to positively regress now.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just going off that one lineup, you're already a millionaire.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, based on this analysis, I think I'm a lock to finish top 100,000 this week in the Millie.
Yeah, I'm projecting your odds of getting a lot more Skalansky bucks are pretty good, especially with that Patrick Laird play.
I like it. I like it. Thank you. This is nice to know because, you know, I mentally am a little beaten down. You lose week after week after week. So to get the Awesemo stamp of approval that I'm on the rise feels good.
Yeah, and of course, you know what, whether they're Skalansky bucks or they're man's coins, you don't want to be paying rake on them. That's an important part of DFS. One place you are not paying rake on your Skalansky bucks or man's coins or American dollars or even Canadian. I don't know if they're in Canada, but let's pretend they are, is FantasyDraft.com, the official home of rake-free DFS. So right now, if you head to FantasyDraft.com, use that promo code Awesemo, you'll get $7 free, your 1 week free entry into the world of rake-free DFS, where all the contest entry fees go right to the winners. That's going to be important for guys like Pete who are just winning, stay winning all the time with their Patrick Laird plays. So go check out FantasyDraft.com. Alex, I have to ask you, you're in Miami this week. You're in one of the bigger tournaments out there, the King of the Beach. How much rake would you have paid this week to other sites that you would not be paying on Fantasy Draft? And of course, the exchange rate that we look for here, with all these currencies going around, how many Hooters wings have you bought with that rate?
Well, the great thing, as you mentioned, you get more Skalansky bucks playing on Fantasy Draft too, because the payouts are just bigger because there's no rake. And if you add it up, if you enter each tournament or the main event, you save about $2, or I mean, you win $2 more per entry. And what that equals is 2 Skalansky wings every time you enter the main event. And although Hooters does not accept the Skalansky buck yet, I think I might try to find one over here because I'm starting to get hungry.
Is it true, Alex, that you got kicked out of a strip club last night trying to pay in Skalansky bucks?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that like they would appreciate that. You know, maybe I ran bad and I didn't have the money, but apparently that doesn't go a long way in the club.
Yeah, when you put the Skalansky buck inside the G string, it doesn't have the same effect.
I was actually thinking about a chicken wing going in a G-string. With a lot of ways that could go south too, I would say. You don't want Daytona beach sauce in the wrong spot. That much is for sure. Anyway, let's get back on track. We're going to get stolen.
This is what happens when you guys invite me on the show.
I know, right? It's not. We have to be Disney Plus friendly so we can get acquired by them. Cool. Let's talk about some of the games here, of course. And if you want the data that we're using at Awesemo.com, independent of any sort of virtual or physical cryptocurrencies out there, go to Awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code Contrary for half off your first month. We also have packages as low as $3.95 a week on there. So go to Awesemo.com/join and choose a package that'll work for you. Let's talk about the chalk game of the week up first here. Tampa Bay at Atlanta. Matt Ryan and company look to be the best play on paper, as well as the highest played stack of the week. And it looks like a pretty good one going against the Tampa Bay team who can't defend the pass at all. Atlanta on the other side been defending things pretty well. Maybe going to get some more turnovers here against Jameis Winston, who just loves to serve them up, much like a Hooters wing at a Miami Strip Club. Alex, I'll ask you first. How are you feeling about this game here? Tampa Bay at Atlanta, Atlanta being the chalk of the week in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not only going to be eating some wings, but some W's this week because I'm liking this game a lot. These are two teams that just pass the ball a ton. That makes for a longer game, and one where there's a lot of correlation between the plays. Feels a little bit weird to be talking about real DFS strategy now, but I'll do my best.
Welcome to my world, Alex. It feels weird talking about regular DFS strategy.
Yeah, these transitions are a little bit different. So, I mean, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are always good plays, and I don't mind maybe picking both of them with Jameis. And if they both have good games, then you're going to win that GPP, especially if you have Patrick Laird in your lineup as well.
Of course, a key part of any lineup build. Pete, how are you feeling about Atlanta's prospects here? Going to have a ton of ownership for Julio. Good amount for Calvin Ridley, too, coming off that big game last week. Matt Ryan, the chalk QB of the week. And Brian Hill, old Brian Hill, holding steady with some ownership even after he just really shat the bed for everybody last week. So, Pete, how are you feeling about these guys on Atlanta?
Yeah, I kind of like Awesemo's line of thinking on this, where you want access to this game, but maybe not eating all of the Atlanta chalk. So going with like a Winston, Godwin, Evans double stack. I rolled out a lineup like that last week. There's kind of been this narrative. Well, I guess it's backed by some data too about Godwin and Evans being negatively correlated and you can only play one of them, but they are so concentrated in their pass offense that you can always justify rolling both out. And then on the other side, I think probably one of the most contrarian plays on the Atlanta team will be Brian Hill. People still think that this Falcons or Bucks defense is a funnel defense and you can't run against them. So I love the idea of going heavy on Bucks with maybe a Brian Hill bring back, maybe sprinkle in a Russell Gage in there and get access to this game in a contrarian way.
So let's talk about some of the contrarian plays from Atlanta, because I don't know that I want to go back to Brian Hill after watching that game and seeing him get vultured by Kadri Allison. Also, frankly, Barner looked better in there as well. Hill, not a guy with a lot of burst, just kind of a dude. And the line wasn't getting a good push against the Carolina team that's been pretty soft against the run. That does freak me out a bit. But Jaden Graham is a guy who jumped out to me. Ran 19 routes last week. Didn't see as many routes for Luke Stocker out there. And Graham's a big boy who did get 2 targets in his 19 routes, 1.2 yards. Being a big boy is a part of the decision. That's what matters. Alex, would you be willing to play a Jaden Graham in this week in which really there aren't any particularly strong tight end plays that we feel really confident about?
I think you got to appreciate his size in this matchup. That increases the odds of the touchdown. But what I look at with the tight ends, again, man, I'm having trouble getting to the serious tone here. So I look for how often they're targeted when running a route. And so far he has 4 targets this season on 33 routes. Pretty low rate. And he's not out there the whole game. He's splitting with Luke Stocker. So I think I might leave Jaden Graham to you, man. You take it down this week.
Like, I'll take all the Jaden Graham. Jaden Graham sounds like a name that could be a hot girl, so I'll take it. He's not. He's a large man. Still, you gonna have any Jaden Graham this week, Pete? He does kind of fit the criteria.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, maybe if he was the Stone Min, if he's 2,500 down there, like with the Caden Smith territory, you can start to talk yourself into it. But at 3,300, it's just an extra 100 up to Gesicki, 200 up to Vance McDonald. It seems a little thin, but hey, I like where your head's at with this because as you know, I'm willing to get funky too.
It is a contrarian show. We got to do our best. Let's talk more about the Tampa Bay side here because Pete talked about him a little bit and we should dig in a bit deeper. We also talked about it, I think, last week with TJ Hernandez from 4 for 4. I think was one of the guys who had the viral tweet, or at least somebody at 4 for 4 who had it about Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Evans having better production in games where he's playing from behind or where Tampa Bay is playing from behind because he's the deep ball guy. Logically, that checks out. Chris Godwin's had better games when they're playing from ahead. Except last week, Tampa Bay was playing from behind, and Scotty Miller went nuts for them, getting a lot of the deep targets, a guy who many people probably not considering. So, Alex, I'll ask you about this Tampa Bay side. Are you willing to go to Scotty Miller at all, or are you just going to trust Mike Evans and hope that he gets the volume back? Or are you afraid of Atlanta's defense? Because it is something scary here about Atlanta where they moved Raheem Morris to be the secondary coach, and since then, they've turned things around in a really appreciable way.
Yeah, I like that name, Scotty Miller. That alone may be worth clicking, but I might just stick to some of the more proven options here.
Are you okay with Mike Evans this week? I know we talked about it a little bit, but are you buying into the narrative things at all with him? And would you have a strong lean one way or the other with Mike Evans or Chris Godwin?
I think I think they're like really close to being even pretty much every week. Evans is slightly better, but I'm really inclined to go with whoever has lower ownership in a given week. And Mike Evans, I believe, has been kind of the hot one recently. So maybe going to Godwin. I mean, it probably won't be contrarian, but it might be a little bit more contrarian than Mike Evans.
And one last question here about these guys. Last week, we saw O.J. Howard give an interception up in which he caught the ball, somehow did a behind-the-back pass that gave it to the opposing team. He then saw the bench for a lot of the game, while Cameron Brate saw a bunch of targets, ended up with 13 targets in the game, caught 10 of them for 73 yards. Is that something you're willing to go back to this week at all, Alex, with Cameron Brate now, I think, priced either the same or slightly higher than O.J. Howard?
I think if you just assume that Brate will be kind of the workhorse this week, then you could go back to him, but I don't think he's a great play. And I don't necessarily think that's super likely. The contrarian play from this game I would look at is maybe Ronald Jones. Kind of the same thing that Peter was saying about Brian Hill, where it's kind of a pass funnel with Atlanta. They're better versus the run. So maybe if you go with the running back in a game, which is supposed to be really high scoring, but it could turn into a different game script. Maybe Ronald Jones could be the sneaky play.
Peter, you got any thoughts about sneaky plays here on the Tampa Bay side? Because we do have Scotty Miller and Cameron Brate, both guys who, say you could say look very similar to Patrick Laird if we want to go there.
Yeah, no, I mean, just a note on Ronald Jones. So the way that they're using him is really interesting. He had the week a couple weeks ago where he had 8 targets, but almost all of those came on first or second down. When they are down or on third down, they're still bringing in Dare Agumbawale to catch passes. So I think you have to, as I like to say, your lineup has to tell a story. I think if you want the Falcons to be throwing constantly in needing to do that, you could project a game script where Tampa Bay has success on the ground, success early. Ronald Jones gets some of those goal line carries, some of those early targets. So if you like projecting Tampa Bay with a lead and Atlanta on the bring back, I like the Ronald Jones play.
All right, so Ronald Jones getting some love this week. He's been a little bit up and down, but still getting a good amount of workload. Maybe it's his week for him going against an Atlanta team that could be a bit overrated by their success the last few weeks. Let's keep it going here. We got another NFC South battle here. Carolina at New Orleans. Carolina looking a little bit less chalky this week than last week. Clearly not thrilled with Kyle Allen going full Jake Delhomme in that spot. But on the other side, a lot of ownership going to New Orleans, in particular Alvin Kamara, who to me looks like one of the best plays of the week. And Michael Thomas, who's been one of the best plays every single week in every matchup, has struggled a bit versus James Bradbury in the past. But Pete, I'll ask you first here. How are you feeling about New Orleans prospects? We're going to have a pretty highly owned Kamara and Michael Thomas. Both those guys could be over 20% on DK.
Yeah, it does feel like Kamara especially is going to be mega chalk. Everyone wants to save and go down from Christian McCaffrey, and you can save so much going down to Kamara. And, his workload, how much he gets used in the passing game makes him super attractive at home too. I actually think Michael Thomas might go a little under-owned. I know you guys have him at 20% right now. I could see that coming in lower as people jam in Julio and Kamara and just don't find a way up to Michael Thomas. So I kind of like Michael Thomas as the pivot off of Julio this week if you can find the cash. But yeah, they're obviously great plays. And maybe one way to get unique is people like to play both of them, but don't play them with Drew Brees as well. So getting Drew Brees in there. And of course we can talk about some of the other ancillary options, but yeah, it's hard not to like these guys at home versus the Panthers, who are really kind of falling apart right now.
Yeah, Kamara did have 10 targets last week, 10 catches from Brees. So there is more of a correlation there than some of the other running backs you'll have when paired with a quarterback. Alex, how are you feeling about the New Orleans main options here, Kamara and Thomas? And would you have some Drew Brees, who's going to be fairly low owned, under 10% compared to some of the other guys like Matt Ryan, who's pretty much double his ownership?
I'm thinking, based on the spread here, that this is a pretty it's not that likely that's a very competitive game. New Orleans is projected to kind of be a big favorite. So I think that it might be a little bit contrarian to go with the Breeze stack, but I tend to stay away from these spots and go to some more like evenly matched teams maybe. But I do think that Kamara and Thomas, tremendous fantasy players, and any lineup with one of the two should be in a good spot.
Is there anybody else in the Saints that you would want? I know we talked last week about the idea of maybe not playing Michael Thomas and trying to go to Ted Ginn and Jared Cook. That strategy would not have worked last week, but Ted Ginn, we did see Calvin Ridley go off to number 2 receiver, some tighter coverage going to Julio Jones last week with James Bradbury on him quite a bit. Would you go to Ted Ginn this week with the kind of same thought process as Ridley, even though he's been much less involved this year than he was last year?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing I'm looking at is he's just not getting enough work to really be a huge fantasy option. He's only out there about 2/3 to 3/4 of the running the routes, and he doesn't get targeted a lot when he's out there. So he's not really jumping out to me as a fantasy play this week.
Pete, you got any love for Ted Ginn or any of these other ancillary pieces for the Saints?
Well, so last week I talked the lineup that Osimo read off. I had Traquan Smith in that lineup. I fell in love with him as kind of that pump play. It was his first kind of real game back in a full capacity. He only had 1 target last week with, as you guys mentioned, Ginn getting a little bit more love, but Also, I want to say, I'm pulling this out of my ass, but I want to say Traquan's home road splits last year were fairly significant. And I just feel, as one of these gut martingaling plays, going back to Traquan Smith at home at the Dome, 3,400 low ownership, you have my stamp of approval.
Yeah, and they did run a comparable amount of routes. Both Traquan Smith and Ted Ginn. Ginn ran 26, Smith ran 24. So even though Ginn got more targets there, it could be a spot here where Smith gets going. And he was a play I feel like a lot of smart people out there were like, yeah, it could be a spot to go off. He didn't at all. But going up against Carolina, maybe you see tighter coverage to Michael Thomas, and maybe that opens things up down the field for him. Pete, I'll ask you first here. We got Christian McCaffrey under 10% owned. He's another guy who's been really good, obviously, on the air. I'm not saying anything new there, but under 10% is pretty rare for him. Are you willing to go to McCaffrey this week on a week where people are afraid of him? He's going against the Saints team who's been really good, limiting teams under 85 rushing yards a game.
Yeah, I mean, I've been one of these guys that have been fading McCaffrey at his price tag and his ownership. So this probably isn't the spot that I'm going to get on him, even though it does sound like he'll be contrarian. I kind of agree with Osimo where this seems like a spot where the Panthers could just kind of implode a little bit. And I mean, when you really think about what you need to get from McCaffrey to win a tournament, in the strain he's going to put on your lineup of you're going to need a couple of these $3,500 punt plays to really smash. And then you need Christian McCaffrey to get what, Osimo, 40 points to help you win a tournament. That just seems like a lot to ask.
Alex, do you agree with that take there? Or McCaffrey might not be a great play, even though the ownership's so low. So if he does smash, there's going to be less people on him this week.
Yeah, I have to agree. It's just not a great spot. His salary is as high as it's ever been. And the team's projected to do pretty poorly this week, sub 20 projected points. And I think that while he might be a high variance player because he represents like so much of the workload of Carolina, I think that just too expensive for me. I'm more of a salt of the earth kind of running back guy.
Speaking of salts of the earth, the guy who was your fade of the week last week, Kyle Allen, had, again, one of the worst games we've seen all year. 4 picks in that one, did not look comfortable. Still, McCaffrey got there with yardage and not touchdowns. But Kyle Allen this week, is there any interest at all in going back to Kyle Allen after he burned so much of the field and looked about as impotent as a quarterback outside of Luke Falk has looked all year?
I kind of like him when he's contrarian. The matchup here is a little bit tough. New Orleans has been significantly above average in pass defense this year. But I do like that DJ Moore gets so many targets. So I could see maybe taking a shot, but that's really contrarian. It might be a little bit too contrarian for me.
Pete, how about you? On the contrary, do you find Kyle Allen to be suitably contrarian or perhaps too contrarian?
Well, I'm one of those guys that you mentioned who got burned hard by Kyle Allen. Although my mind was honestly blown when I finally pulled up my DK, single entry team with Kyle Allen. I thought he was going to have like 4 or 5 points. I mean, when you have 4 picks and no touchdowns, and he still had 13 points because they just chucked it the whole game. But I think to Osimo's point, I think you can get access to him via, DJ Moore or Curtis Samuel, Greg Olsen even, and not have to deal with the headache of playing Kyle Allen. I think there's just better punt quarterbacks there, but I do like the idea of going back to the receivers.
Yeah, and Marshawn Lattimore could be back this week. He's still marked as questionable, but I think he practiced, if I'm correct about that, or at least practiced in some capacity. So if he's back out, they're going to make things tougher on DJ Moore. So it finally could be the week perhaps that Curtis Samuel gets going, and maybe he's the way that they do have some offense there. But yeah, not a great spot for Kyle Allen, and going to be tough for him to build on his terrible game last week where I think people finally want Cam Newton back. So Cam Newton's got that going for him. The marquee game of the week we have to hit on, Miami at Cleveland, of course, where all the chalk is going to be on the Miami side. And on Cleveland's side, finally a nice total for them. One of the highest implied totals of the week. I think it's finally a spot where you can play Odell Beckham and you can run it back with somebody on Miami. Pete, if you're going to run it back with anybody on Miami, who would it be?
Oh, man. I mean, talk about teeing me up. You just said it right here, and then I just take a big Patrick Laird cut, and there it goes over. Honestly, though, I like this game because there are so many viable punt plays on the Dolphins. I mean, you can make cases for Allen Hurns, Mike Gesicki, and, of course, the man of the hour, Patrick Laird. All of those guys, project well in a negative game script. They're 10-point dogs. We know Fitzpatrick's willing to sling it around. I really like builds that have maybe Chubb in it, and then you bring it back with a couple of these Miami pass catchers. I do like Laird. I really think that he's going to get more work this week as they, continue to just smash Balaj for 2 yards per carry. I just don't know how you're going to be able to do that if you're down 10 plus points. But yeah, Gesicki and Hearns I like as well.
Yeah, and Parker too has been very involved. Certainly not cheap, not the punt play price that you mentioned, but he has been really involved. He'll have some ownership this week, and he's been looking good since Preston Williams went out. Preston Williams seemed to be the preferred target there, but Parker has really stepped up, a couple 100-yard games. Alex, I'll ask you about this Miami side first. Who's the most appealing to you here, and why is it Patrick Laird?
So I gotta give Patrick Laird some credit here. He's been targeted 8 times on 18 routes for 44%. And if you extrapolate that to maybe a full time,
hey, go off, King, go off.
If you extrapolate that to a full game where maybe Balaj gets benched, that would be about 16 targets, and I think you can get it done in that instance. But Peter, I'm pained that you listed off every Miami Dolphin that's valued this week, and you just skimmed over Kalen Balaj because yeah, he might be the guy that I'm martingaling, just doubling up my exposure every single week. Because he was out there for 53 of 69 plays last week. And if Miami exceeds expectations this week, it probably won't happen. But I like to play the what-if game here. And I also like to tell a story with my lineups. And the story I want to tell is Hamlet. I think that maybe Kalen Balaj smashes Patrick Laird, it double crosses him, and that.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys. It's been fun.
It feels like more of a Macbeth.
Jeez.
But no, I think there are some interesting plays on Miami, including Kalen Balaj, who just continues to see the work, and who knows how it goes. But we should talk about the Cleveland side because there actually is going to be a good amount of ownership on Cleveland. To be clear, we like to joke about Patrick Laird, and Pete, cover yours if you need to, but he's only going to be protected for under 2% ownership. So despite his big debut last, or not even debut, but his big burst onto the public's consciousness last week, he's not
no, but I will say, I've said this to you. I've said it to the guys at RG. I've said it to Levitan. I've said it to Fanshare. Anyone who projects ownership, you need to throttle up your Laird projections at least 2 to 3 percentage points. I promise you he will come in over 2% because I will go to the grave making sure he does.
Does he have a nickname? Have you gotten some sort of a momentum behind that? Because I feel like that could help quite a bit. Marketing always helps.
Well, it does. So RotoWare did just come out with a shirt that says "Praise the Laird." So I like, evoking the religious imagery with him. I think that's probably the Lions Laird. I think is pretty good too. We got some stuff to work with.
That's good. It all takes a little bit of marketing behind him, and he can end up as the next Peyton Hillis, and that's all we want out of the world.
There we go. One
of the most regretful Madden cover boys in history. But speaking of Cleveland, going to have some ownership on them. Odell Beckham not going to be subject to the Miami nightlife that our friend here Alex has been. So he'll be doing well in Cleveland. Could be a smash spot for him. He's had over 10 targets in the last 2 games, been more involved. They have force fed on the ball. If you're going to force feed him the ball, this is the spot. Nick Needham has been a good coverage guy this year. He should be shadowing Odell. He gave up a lot of production last week to John Brown. So, Alex, how are you feeling about Odell Beckham this week? Ownership's going to be there, but his price is reasonable. And if he's ever going to have the big day that we've all waited for him, this seems like the spot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because on FanDuel, he's so much cheaper than FantasyDraft and DraftKings relatively. I know he's 7K on both FanDuel and DraftKings, but 7K is a lot less on FanDuel, and I think he's a good play on there. On DraftKings, I just don't really think there's enough volume here, and I'm thinking that maybe Cleveland runs the ball more playing Miami because that seems to be the trend, and that would lead me to think maybe Nick Chubb would be the best play on the team.
Pete, do you agree here? Do you think that we have some room for Odell and Chubb to get there, or is Kareem Hunt in his Patrick Laird light role with a lot of pass catching? Is he going to be in play? Which are you feeling the most for the Browns?
I think both can be in play. I mean, my buddy Pat Thorman wrote up an article about this being a pace up in both of these teams playing a little faster now. Last week, Chubb had 27 carries and Odell Beckham had 10 targets. So we've seen games where these guys can both get the volume. The interesting thing about Odell too is he, on that, I believe it was one of the first drives of the game, fell down at the 1. They actually called back the touchdown. I mean, if he gets in the end zone there, his ownership is probably 10% higher. So you are getting just kind of this, no TD discount on Odell Beckham. But I agree. I like to tell a story with my lineups, and it is a little harder to know how do you get Chubb and Odell to both reach their ceilings, because you want Chubb punching in those touchdowns, especially with Kareem Hunt now getting all the pass work. But I do think both of them could hit their volume ceilings. It's just, can that turn into fantasy points?
Yeah, and I think the other question that we have to ask here is Baker Mayfield. His price is pretty reasonable, significantly cheaper than Matt Ryan, who's one of the other chalk QBs we've talked about so far. I do think that this is a spot where you might want to build some confidence for Baker, given the fact he's passing for an under 60% completion rate on the year. I feel like he needs to beat up on somebody to get it going. Getting intercepted at a higher than league average rate and getting touchdowns at a lower than league average rate. So to me, I'm a little more intrigued by the pass game here than it seems like you guys may be. Just because Chubb is priced up, and I feel like that's not the case for Odell and even Jarvis Landry. So Alex, I'll ask you first, would you have any Baker this week? I know you're not big on the pass game, but at his price, he could have ownership if they do decide to go that way and get him, let him just air it out a little bit more.
Yo, Spags, man, this is the NFL. If there's a team that's trying to build confidence for a guy, I'm just not going to play that team, I have to say. I don't think Baker is that good of a play this week because the matchup versus Miami, while their defense has been better recently, of course, winning a couple games, we can't project Miami to be kind of that defense that'll allow everyone to throw 400 yards like early in the season. And I think that because of the matchup, he might, and kind of his status in the community as a fan favorite, he might just be over on this week.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Josh Allen did throw for 3 touchdowns last week, but only 256 of those were passing yards. And he ran for 56 yards too. I'm intrigued by Baker. I think you guys don't seem that way. But actually, Pete, you can be the tiebreaker here. Do you have any Baker this week at 10% ownership?
Yeah, I think, last week, Josh Allen to John Brown won someone the Millie. The problem is there's not a Jarvis Landry on the Bills too that's also going to command targets. And I'd be remiss if we didn't mention here Jarvis Landry revenge game against the Dolphins too. So he's been seeing a ton of targets as well. I guess you just have to take a stand and try to figure out where you think these targets are going to go. But I think you can definitely roll out Baker.
Okay, yeah. So look, I think we now win 2-1. I like Baker more. I just think this is a spot where he seems like he's due for positive regression. He was good last year. His stats were significantly better last year. And if you can get your game going and maybe prove to people, if you are a coach who's under some heat like Freddie Kitchens is, there's heat in the kitchen, guys. Then there is a situation where I think you could see him push the pass game up a little bit more just to show, hey, we're not as incompetent as we seem. If you're going to do it against Miami is the spot where you would do it. So that's why I'll be having some Baker and I'll die with that ship this week. Let's keep going here. Oakland at the Jets. Going to be another fairly lofty total for Oakland on the road after they disappointed at home last week against Cincinnati. Still had some decent production for Josh Jacobs, who did not get into the end zone. Darren Waller also was fine, but did not get into the end zone. Tyrell Williams continues to get into the end zone, but not get a bunch of work. Oakland kind of a dumpster fire here, but much like the Kyle Allen logic, there could be some reason to go back to Derek Carr this week. So Alex, will you have any Derek Carr going against the Jets team, who is one of those funnel teams who gives up a lot more to the pass and not much to the run?
Yeah, so I think it's a pretty good spot. Their passing defense is about average, so I'm not thinking that Carr will smash or anything, but I kind of like Darren Waller because he's another guy where he had the touchdown all lined up and then it got called back. And if he made that would totally have reversed the narrative that he's just been taking a big hit in production recently. But he's been terrific on this season when you look at it as a whole. So I think that he's one of my favorite plays of the week, especially that because he's at tight end and that's a tough spot to fill. So I might take some chances on Carr as well if I might have a lot of Waller.
Pete, do you have any love for these Raiders guys here? The passing game Alex mentioned with Waller, who's been the really might be the best tight end play still, even if he hasn't had that big success recently. And Josh Jacobs too was a chalk play last week. People may be a bit disappointed after he didn't get in the end zone. He had over 100 rushing yards. They do commit to giving him the ball, so maybe he can somehow break through this Jets defense. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Waller, right, is the beginning of the year, he was commanding such a massive target share. They were funneling the entire offense through him. So you can justify playing a guy that's chalky when he's getting that kind of volume. It's gotten a little dicier recently with once Tyrell Williams is back healthy. I mean, Hunter Renfrow continues over the past 3 weeks. He's averaging 6 targets a game. But I think when you then go back to Waller is when he's not going to be the chalk option. So getting Waller, you guys have him at 10% ownership right now. That seems pretty nice. And I do like targeting this game as everyone kind of gravitates to the Saints, the Bucks, the Falcons, and doing something with Carr, Waller. And, Tyrell Williams has been, working back in his first few games this season. He was commanding a huge target share. It's been a little lower, but he also offers that kind of spiked potential we like in tournaments. So yeah, I like a lot of these pass catchers. And yeah, you mentioned Josh Jacobs too. I mean, theoretically on paper, it's a tough matchup, but he's also been catching passes, which always kind of helps raise the floor, even if he gets game scripted out of rushing work.
And it is still a bad Jets defense in the red zone. There's some noise in those stats, but they are giving up 5.3 points per red zone visit, giving up scores 65% of the time when teams are in the red zone. And Josh Jacobs gets a lot of that red zone work. So he intrigues me a bit this week. I imagine I'll have a little, but tough to trust this price up going against the Jets defense. It's still not giving up a lot of production on the ground overall. Jets offense, though, last week, Sam Darnold had his best game of the year, threw 4 touchdowns against Washington, only 30 passes for him to do that as well. Everybody got a touchdown on that team, doing the Oprah approach to touchdowns for the Jets. Still not a high-octane offense, still can't really pass block too well. Robbie Anderson really just not getting going at this point. Had a touchdown last week, but only 1 catch was that touchdown. So, Alex, I'll ask you, the Jets, this is the way that Darren Waller has that upside. He's had his upside in games where Oakland has trailed. You think the Jets can put up some points here at home coming off of their best game of the year?
Yeah, there's potential. Oakland has been weaker than average against the pass this year, and that provides some much-needed optimism for Sam Darnold. The one thing I don't love about the Jets is they do spread the ball around pretty evenly to all their guys. So that makes it hard for any individual to be a good play. And Jamison Crowder is just like absurdly expensive across the industry. So it's hard to land on him. I'll probably, if I go to a game stack, I'll probably end up on Bell because although he hasn't been quite the bell cow with Bilal Powell kind of taking some of the rushing attempts. Oh, you guys see what I did there?
That was cute.
Yeah, you like that?
I like that.
Yeah. He's still a pretty high volume guy. So,
Pete, how are you feeling about this offense and the bell cow Le'Veon Bell?
Yeah, I mean, Le'Veon is one of those things where this is the true, like, are you on team analytics or in volume, or are you on team watch the tape? Because you look at his volume, it's great. He is, the dare I say bell cow, but then you watch him play the game and it's like, this guy looks like dust, and you're just praying he falls into the end zone, which he has the past couple of weeks. I do find myself, so I have something that I need to confess. I love Robbie Anderson. I love playing Robbie Anderson. I love losing money playing Robbie Anderson. And I know Jamison Crowder is the target hog. I know Ryan Griffin is the one who gets into the end zone. I know Demaryius Thomas is the better points per dollar play. And yet I still want to play Robbie Anderson in tournaments because he's just one play away from a big spiked play. So yeah, I can definitely get down with the Jets here.
I will say, as somebody who also shares that same love for Robbie Anderson and has played him steadily, like less and less each week over the last month, because they had this run of really great opponents. They do not defend. They just don't defend pass rushers well at all. So there's no room for Robbie to get open. Every time he even gets close to getting open, like Darnold has to get rid of the ball and just chucks it up, and it's nowhere close. It's been a disaster. Again, team watch the film, but that's why I would favor Crowder. I'd favor Ryan Griffin, who I feel like actually we should talk maybe a little bit more about. His price is down, or not, his price is up, but still down relative to other top tight ends. He's been really involved with Chris Herndon on the IR. So, Alex, do you find any value at all in Ryan Griffin here on a week again where there really aren't a lot of great smash tight end plays?
No, I'm fading him. The reason why is I know he had like a big game, and that's kind of why he's emerged as a top pick of conversation. But he's just another guy that he doesn't get targeted very much when he's out there. He plays a lot for the position, but he's only been targeted 30 times this season, over 252 routes. And that kind of production, I think that's like 2 or 3 targets a game. That's not going to really get it done for fantasy.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And if you look at the box scores, he has had those 2 games over 24 fantasy points out of the last 4, but it does seem a bit unsustainable. Pete, will you have any Ryan Griffin this week?
Probably not, because again, I'm banking on Robbie Anderson getting a few of those touchdowns. And like, he is getting some of those red zone looks, but like Alex said, his targets are all over the map. Week 9, he had 8, week 10, he has 1, last week he has 5. So I think there's better plays at tight end.
Okay, that seems fair. Let's keep going here. And guys, hit that like button. The likes help us out quite a bit, help us bump up the algorithms and all that. And we're going to hit the stretch run here. We started a little bit late, so we'll go to, looks like to 3:10 East Coast time to hit that hour mark. Let's go into this game here with Seattle at Philadelphia. Seattle's defense hasn't been great. Russell Wilson can get the pass game going in any spot. And the Seattle defense really not good enough where Philly can finally get their pass game going regardless of who's out there. We do have a lot of questionable guys for them. Pete, I'll ask you first. Did you like this game at all? Because it seems like one to me that really could go either way. It wouldn't shock me if the defenses rose to the occasion a bit, slowed things down a bit, but also Seattle's defense is bad enough versus the pass in particular where Philly could get going and Zach Ertz has been a beast. So maybe they have something there.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something here. Seattle, this season has found themselves, we always like the Tampa Bay, Atlanta, for finding these shootout games. Seattle's also been very friendly for good game environments. I don't know where you guys stand on how important weather is. I am seeing inklings about 30-mile-per-hour winds. I know we're projecting this like 48 hours out, but people freak out about weather. I might be one of them freaking out right now. So that's something to monitor. But I do think there's lots of interesting plays here. Maybe going back to Miles Sanders. Now that everyone's off of him, we got to kind of see what the news is on Jordan Howard. I do like Zach Ertz. He's been such a volume guy. I think people have been a little wanting with Dallas Goedert, but like his role just is not there. And Ertz continues to command, 10 plus targets over these past couple weeks. So yeah, I'm intrigued by this game and I think you're going to get it at pretty low ownership.
Alex, how do you feel about this game here? The total seems like it's come up a little bit throughout the week, not one of the worst ones, and should be a competitive game, which you said you favor. So how are you feeling about Seattle and Philadelphia?
First, I want to rewind a second to this asking for likes, man. Chris, you're being way too nice here. So one of my traditions is bullying people for likes. If you don't click this like button, then Myles Gaskin is going to take all the work from both Kalen Ballage and Patrick Laird this week, and we're all going to be losing our money on these contrarian plays. So when it comes to Philadelphia, I think that it's another team that spreads it out a lot, but I like Miles Sanders. I was very skeptical about the workload being there because when Darren Sproles was out earlier in the year, he didn't really see much of an increased role. Now they brought in Jay Ajayi, and they said he's going to play 20 snaps last week, and he played 0 snaps. Miles Sanders played 61 of 72, and that shows there's like a potential for him to be like a true workhorse here. And if he is, he's priced way too low. So I think he's a really great play in fantasy.
So ownership-wise, you're okay with him too? He's over 20%, which puts him in that Alvin Kamara tier.
Yeah, I mean, it's painful to say I like someone that highly owned on the contrary, but yeah, I like him.
Pete, do you have any thoughts here on Miles Sanders? The Seattle run defense actually has given up some production on the year, 4.5 yards per rush, a decent 5.4% rushing TD rate. So there has been some room there for guys to get something going.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that makes it maybe a little nervous of playing Miles Sanders is one of his kind of selling points is he's getting these down the field targets, and he's, racked up a couple of these big plays on the wheel routes and stuff. Belichick shut that down last week, but when you do look at his targets, it's 4-3-3, which is fine. But when he's not getting a huge rush share, it does make him more of a volatile play than I think we'd like to admit. But because they use him in those kind of deeper, average depth of targets, he is intriguing to me, but I would prefer to play him when he's less popular, which hopefully he will be this week.
Yeah, that makes sense. Seattle on the other side too, going against Philadelphia's defense, which has looked good in the last few weeks, or not good, but better than they were. They did get rid of Orlando Scandrick, kind of had some media stuff there, which happened to correlate with them turning things around a bit in the secondary, and still a better run defense than a secondary overall. So Alex, the Seattle side, Tyler Lockett going to be out there after he did hurt himself in their last game, but he practiced this week, so he should be good to go. Chris Carson going to have some ownership on him. Again, a tough Philadelphia run defense overall, so maybe not the greatest play. But how are you feeling about Seattle side? Which guys would you want the most?
Yeah, I think Tyler Lockett's the guy I'm honing in on here. He's been having a tremendous season, catching over 80% of his targets, and he's the leading target getter on Seattle's side. DK Metcalf is kind of the other option, but his price has gone way, way up. One thing I will mention is that so Ed Dixon was supposed to come back from the IR, but he did not. So Jacob Hollister is really the only tight end that's healthy because Luke Wilson's out too. His prices are getting up a little bit on DraftKings, but on FantasyDraft at 7,300 and on FanDuel, he's kind of cheap. So I think he could be a dark throw play.
Pete, which guys would you want the most here on the Seahawks side?
Yeah, I'll make a case for Chris Carson because Pete Carroll loves Chris Carson even more than I love Patrick Laird, which is saying something. I mean, this guy could do anything and they would still put the ball in his chest 25 times. And he still also gets a few targets a game. So if you do want to envision a game scenario where Wentz to Ertz and Miles Sanders or whatever is really going off, I think you probably need to project Seattle having some success on the ground. And Chris Carson, it's a really gross week at running back. We know Kamara's going to, soak up a ton of ownership. Carson at 6,700 on DraftKings at fairly low ownership, just knowing the volume is going to be there. He's kind of the type of contrarian plays I normally like to make at running back, where you fade Carson when he's the mega chalk, and then you play him when he's going to be low owned. I kind of like having a little bit of him.
Yeah, that makes sense. Certainly the commitment to the run there is there. And in Philadelphia, even though they are good, sometimes you do break, and at least on a 1 week basis. So we'll see. Maybe Chris Carson can get there, but I think that's a fair point to make. Let's keep going, guys. We got a couple more games hit before I turn the floor over to you guys, see if there's anything that we haven't hit on that's worth it. But Denver at Buffalo, I feel like we need to talk about, because Josh Allen, as we mentioned earlier, had a smash week last week, has been getting the reins loosened a little bit in the last few weeks, seeing more pass game work, seeing more deep ball targets after they played pretty conservatively, doing just enough to win each week. He's had his two biggest fantasy games of the year in the last 2 weeks, going against Cleveland and Miami. Now a much worse spot going against Denver, going to be up in Buffalo. And we talked a little bit about the weather on the East Coast. Might not be the greatest in Buffalo either, but still Josh Allen on a heater, I think, is something that is paid off for a lot of people down the stretch of the year last year. So Alex, I'll ask you, do you have any Buffalo exposure at all in a contrarian spot, despite the fact that Josh Allen just went off along with John Brown last week?
I think the matchup versus Denver is a little bit tough because they've been above average in both the run and pass. And I think that's why we're seeing this team total of 20 for Buffalo, which isn't particularly inspiring. If I was to go to one guy, I'm kind of looking at Isaiah McKenzie. He wasn't even playing a lot of the season because they were going to Duke Williams. But Duke Williams has been inactive the last few weeks, and Isaiah McKenzie has been seeing a lot of snaps. This is a guy who gets targeted a lot when he's on the field. So I was talking about some of these tight ends, 12%. Isaiah McKenzie's at 20%, and that was true both this year and last year. So he's a guy that can get some separation, get open. So if everyone is going to John Brown, maybe, well, as you said, he's contrarian too because of the price, but I think that Isaiah McKenzie could be my Patrick Laird of the week.
Yeah, 6 targets last week on 31 routes, so he was involved. Pete, would you have any love for these Buffalo guys, given that, they did just go off last week, and Denver is a tough defense. It's not a great team total, but if we want to be contrarian, this is one spot where you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, there's so many plays we like. You kind of have to take a stand somewhere, and I guess I'm just going to take my stand and say I'm full fading this game. I mean, the total's the lowest on the week. Alex referenced the Bills team total. It's 37.5 is what it opened at. I saw it's now down to 36.5. I just worry about what kind of realistic ceiling do we have in this game. I think if you are going to do something, doing a punt play like McKenzie makes sense, but I don't want to pay up for any of these guys in a game that it's really hard to see shooting out.
How about on the other side? Because Denver is going to have some ownership for Phillip Lindsay. They have recommitted to him as the lead back, the Le'Veon Bell-esque bell cow back, I think is what they want to call him specifically. But Buffalo's run defense really not that good, getting worse by the week, it seems. And really, they're 1 weak spot. Secondary is pretty good, but the run defense isn't great. And Denver does seem to want to run for the most part, even though they've passed a bit more with Brandon Allen. So, Pete, would you have any Phillip Lindsay this week where he's going to be almost 15% owned?
See, that's the thing too. There is this kind of steam picking up on Phillip Lindsay because of the Bills being not so great against the run and that news report about them committing to him. One huge thing that concerns me about Lindsay is earlier this season, him and Freeman were in a direct 50-50 split. And Devonta Booker is now a thing, and he's commanding a couple targets. And by thing, I mean, once we know that we can live with two-man backfields, but once you introduce that third guy, it really caps all their ceiling. That's why we have the headaches with Ronald Jones and Peyton Barber and Dare, is because if you got rid of one of those guys, two of them could be fantasy, assets. So I think I'm off Lindsay if he's popular. And again, referencing this total, it is hard to bet against Sutton, though, because that guy is a grown-ass man who just produces in every single possible game environment, quarterback. He's just a baller. So I have a hard time betting against Sutton, but again, I'm just not going to play anyone in this game.
Yeah, Sutton going to find some tough defense against Tre'Davious White, but he's beaten a lot of matchups, as Pete mentioned, so we'll see. Alex, any love for you with Lindsay here, or Noah Fant, who's also going to have some ownership on him?
I'm going to go good chalk with Lindsay. I think that last week was pretty inspiring with 51 of 79 snaps. That was a lot more than he had been seeing, and he got 16 of 31 carries. Royce Freeman only got 8. Devontae Booker played 5 snaps, so it was kind of interesting they reintroduced him, but I'm seeing some pretty good signs for Lindsay, and the main selling point for me is the price. 5,200 on DraftKings, 6.3 on FanDuel. That's a pretty good bargain, and I think that will help you fill out your roster.
All right, and the last game I want to hit on before I turn the floor over to you guys, Jacksonville at Tennessee. This one in particular, going to have 2 running backs. Alex, your projections are pretty high on Leonard Fournette, who one would think could have more opportunity. He had kind of a down game last week, but Nick Foles throwing the ball deeper down the field should open up some opportunity for Fournette to get those goal line runs, which he's not seen a ton of on the year. And Derrick Henry on the other side going against Jacksonville. Jacksonville, the worst run defense in the league right now on paper. Poorest graded by a PFF and DVOA. And also they're giving up over 5 yards per rush. So seems like a spot here where both running backs are worth the exposure that they have. The rest of the game kind of unknown. DJ Chark, I think, always an interesting play, and especially with Nick Foles throwing more deep balls. But Alex, I'll ask you here, what are the most appealing parts, if anything, this Jacksonville at Tennessee game?
I think the Fournette is always a good option. This team total of 19 is not very good, but he gets a larger workload or a larger percentage of the work compared to pretty much anyone except Christian McCaffrey. So the price tag of being 7Ks across the industry is pretty reasonable. And on FanDuel at 7K, he's just like an absolute lock for me, I think. Just because he's kind of game script proof too, in that he's getting a lot of targets like pretty often. So I think that he's a guy that I want to build some lineups around.
And no interest in Henry Free?
Let me go to Henry here. I was thinking more Fournette. I think Henry's fine, but he's not really popping out as much to me because he doesn't get those targets that Fournette does.
Yeah, the floor a little lower for him, only getting about 1 target a game, which are, I guess, closer to 2 now, but still not enough involvement there. Pete, how about you? Any love for these guys, the running backs in particular? But it seems like the 3 noteworthy guys are going to be Fournette, Henry, and DJ Chark.
Yeah, I'm with Osmo on Henry. Like, I feel you're going to get burned sometimes, but if you just have a rule of thumb where you don't play these running backs that catch a lot of passes when they're mega chalk, you're going to come out ahead in the long run, because we see this enthusiasm build throughout the week. Last week, it was Josh Jacobs versus the Bengals. And sure, he ran bad not to get there, but he doesn't have as many outs as, say, an Alvin Kamara or someone who reliably catches passes. And Henry, his floor is really low if he can't get it going in the run game. So to me, I'm basically just auto fading these guys when they're over 15%, because everyone now just has this narrative that Tennessee's just going to crush. I mean, literally in the chat, someone said Henry's going for 305 TDs. So once we get that kind of Patrick Laird-esque enthusiasm building, I'm fading Henry. But yeah, I like those pass catching options on Jacksonville. DJ Chark just has such a monster ceiling. I think there was some concern like, oh, does Foles like him as much as Minshew did? Comes back, gets 15 targets. So Chark's a great play in it. What do you guys have his ownership at?
9% right now in DK.
Yeah, that seems very nice.
Yeah, the price is there. He projects well. DJ Chark, a guy I'll definitely be over the field on. I think I'm a little more bullish on Derrick Henry than you guys, just because like I get the pass game floor does hurt things quite a bit, but still I think the option is really here. The opportunity is really there rather. Going against Jacksonville, that defense is so bad, and Henry just sees enough work where, and we know he can break one. He is one of the better running backs in terms of elusiveness, in terms of that breakaway speed, despite being a gigantic Mack truck of a human being. So he and Jaden Graham, the two big boys I'm intrigued by this week, and I'm willing to have some of. Pete, I'll ask you first here. We talked about a lot of guys, but any singular player or game that we haven't hit on that's particularly appealing to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to talk about, I would not log off without talking about Dallas, New England. I think it's interesting because it has, a higher total, or I guess it's, at 45, but it seems like there can be points in this game. It's just people have a hard time knowing where to go. It doesn't seem like, outside of maybe Edelman, that a lot of plays are drawing any interest here. One guy that my buddy, Mr. Tuttle05 has kind of got me on is N'Keal Harry, the rookie who they took in the first round, that he came back last week. But the thing that's interesting about him is, well, one, he's cheap. Two, Philip Dorsett, as of this morning, still had not been cleared from the concussion protocol. Mohamed Sanu's dealing with an ankle injury. They're going to have to throw the ball somewhere. If you like James White, Edelman, to me, Harry offers you cheap access to this game and New England, and he's someone that's more and more becoming interesting to me.
Alex, do you have any thoughts on that?
I can't say that I'm on him, but that's what makes him kind of a contrarian play. It's hard to go off these assumptions about who's going to play and who's not at this point. But if there are guys out for the Patriots, that makes sense to me. But I was watching your Swolecast, Peter, this morning, and it seemed like kind of a competition between touts who has Dak projected the lowest this week.
Yeah, you got to get in the mix.
Well, maybe I'll throw my hat in. I mean, he doesn't look like a good play to me either, but maybe that'll really depress the ownership on guys like Amari Cooper, who, I mean, it's a tough matchup, but it's a pretty good player, so I could see myself taking some shots.
Would you guys take any shots on Zeke this week, given that New England's run defense has been the one thing they've shown some weakness in, and Dallas's pass blocking, or their run blocking, not quite as good as last year, but Baltimore kind of gave us a roadmap there with an elite, one of a kind QB, and they're doing a lot of the damage, but they did run the ball fairly well when committed to it. So, Alex, would you go to any Zeke this week with his price down?
Well, it's tough to find room for him in my lineup with all the Patrick Laird, but I think that the price being down is pretty appealing, especially on FanDuel at $8K. I think that he might make some of my rosters.
Pete, would you have any interest in Zeke this week?
Yeah, I think I'll take the same cop-out that Alex said and say he's a better play on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings. It's weird. He's definitely not the Zeke of previous years that was the there's no pun on Ezekiel Belliot. I tried to get there. But yeah, I mean, they're using Tony Pollard as their kind of pass catching running back. So that's concerning for Zeke's ceiling. But yeah, if you can project a positive game script for Dallas, I don't hate it. And yeah, FanDuel seems to make some sense.
Yeah. So one interesting play there. And Alex, anybody that we haven't hit on that you want to hit on fast, or any games that we haven't talked about? People in the chat talking about Ryan Nall on the Bears, who they're lovingly referring to as Fat Christian McCaffrey, which he wasn't on my radar this week, but maybe he's on yours or anybody else.
I don't even know who that guy is, but if Montgomery's out, maybe we'll take a look. But actually, I'll get to some other games in the contrarian picks because I got some queued up here.
All right, so let's do that here. So guys, hit that like button right now. As always, the contrarian picks are only going to be as good and as accurate as the amount of likes we have. It's a direct mathematical correlation that Alex has spent years laboring over, like the Zach Galifianakis meme. So go, please hit that like button right now. And of course, shout out it once again to Fantasy Draft, fantasydraft.com, the official home of Rake Free DFS. So check them out right now. Use that promo code AWESOMO for your free 7-day trial and your entry into the world of Rake Free DFS, where all of the contest entry fees get paid right to the winner. So go check them out. All right, Pete, you are the guest here. We always like to do our contrarian picks and fade of the week at the end. So let's ask you first, Pete, who would be your contrarian QB pick for week 11?
Okay.
Week 12? Who do you pick for last week?
Let's see here. So, and we said like sub 5%, Alex. That's what makes it move.
Yeah.
I am going to go with Let me just make sure he's sub 5 here. Yeah, I'm going to go with Sam Darnold at 3.5%. As we said, the Raiders give up a lot of big pass plays. Maybe I'll double dip here and go Robbie Anderson as my other contrarian, but Sam Darnold has a decent amount of weapons that can get it done. If we don't think Bell really has much left in the tank for getting it going on the ground and this game shoots out, Darnold should be a beneficiary. So I'll go Sam Darnold.
All right, Alex, how are you going to top that?
I got a great play here. It's someone that has lost people a ton of money in DFS so far. Mitchell Trubisky. His numbers this year have been abysmal, but he's facing the Giants. And while their numbers per game aren't that bad, only 259 passing yards per game allowed, it's 8.8 yards per attempt for opposing teams versus the Giants this year, which is second worst in the league. And Mitch Trubisky needs all the help he can get. And I kind of like some of the pricing on guys like Robinson and Gabriel. I might be a homer, but Mitch Trubisky might be my guy.
So I'll go with the guy I went with last week, and hopefully, some people did tweet me that they tailed it. Jeff Driscoll, again, under 5%, going against Washington. We just saw give up a monster game to Sam Darnold. I will not let Jeff Driscoll die. He is a good, not a good quarterback. He's a good fantasy quarterback. He runs. He does pass the ball pretty well. Had 2 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown last week going against Washington, whose defense is weak and their offensive line is a disaster, who their quarterback has to beg them to guard better, which I thought was, I don't know if you guys saw that clip, but Dwayne Haskins asking his line, like, what do I have to do to help you guys? And they just look at him and shrug. It's one of the funniest, saddest clips of the week. But Jeff Driscoll is going to be in a spot here to smash, so he's my pick. Alex, I'll turn it back to you. Who'd be your contrarian running back of the week?
This one is a little bit over 5%, but I'm looking at my other favorite team, the Lions. I see they have this nice matchup with Washington where they're favored to win it on the road. And they had a new face in the mix last week, Bo Scarborough, who ran 16 times out of 25 for the Lions in a game where, Washington's defense is fine. They're not great to pick on, but the price is low, and if he gets that kind of volume this week, I think he could be a pretty good play.
Washington giving up 134 rushing yards per game, and Bo Scarborough may be the remedy that run game has been looking for. Pete, who'd be your contrarian running back pick?
Well, by your ownership projections, obviously Patrick Laird at 1.2% is the smash contrarian play of the week. I think he'll be above 5%, so I should probably find a different play. Let's go with Zeke. I know we mentioned him earlier, but as far as it's kind of slim pickings down here for viable punt plays, and just with so much, actually, no, I'm going to change my mind. A guy we haven't talked about much. Where do you guys have Barkley? No, 6.3. Okay, I guess I have to go with Zeke.
Well, we'll take it. It's a fungible rule.
So if I do, Saquon Barkley at 7,900, he's going to draw very little ownership. He's coming off the bye. I mean, again, this is mainly just like people are fading him because he hasn't looked good this season. But if you want to stack up your Bears, like you are Alex is down there in Miami, you bring it back with Saquon Barkley, who, again, we talk about who are these running backs that have pass catching outs. We know Saquon is going to get 5 to 6 targets. We know he has big playability. Let's go with Saquon.
All right, and there are not a lot of guys who are under that 5% threshold, so I think we're skimming for garbage here, but I'll go Darius Geis. Adrian Peterson's been banged up. He's going to play, but Geis is back in the mix. Apparently, I just love this Detroit-Washington game, so that's fun. But Geis is involved, did show some breakaway ability last week, and maybe he gets some check downs, though Chris Thompson could be back in the mix. So actually, I think he might have missed practice yesterday, so maybe not. But if he isn't, that's going to decrease the opportunity a bit. But Darius Geis, interesting. They could get him some run here down the stretch, so I'll go Darius Geis. And Pete, contrarian wide receiver pick for you. Who would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned a few, obviously Robbie Anderson, I think N'Keal Harry. One guy, though, I think that you can project for more volume than those guys is Curtis Samuel. And he's just a guy like, when you talk about Curtis Samuel online, you'll go and see, and just everyone is like, oh, Kyle Allen's so bad, he can't get him the ball. But Curtis Samuel is still up there in air yards and red zone targets, like top of the league up there. So you could do a lot worse than a guy that's going to be in a negative game script that still commands a ton of targets, is relatively cheap, especially if DJ Moore gets a little more steam, and is going to come in at low ownership. So I still like Curtis Samuel.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian wide receiver pick for week 12?
This one, I'm kind of surprised as contrarian. I see that Pittsburgh is matched up against Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is the worst pass defense in the league. Juju is out for week 12. This guy, he was bleeding from the ear in his last game, but he's been practicing in full. Deontay Johnson. I think a lot of people might think he doesn't even play this game, but it seems like he's going to. And I kind of like the Pittsburgh stack too. Just with Juju out and a really good matchup, you should be able to find some good plays here.
So actually, I was going to say the same, but in fact, I'll go James Washington. The hope for me would that maybe be that Mason Rudolph getting hit in the head with a helmet somehow fix what's wrong in his brain, where he sucks every single week and can't seem to throw well. And Cincinnati's just a bad enough defense where one of these guys can get going. So Deontay Johnson, I would say, is preferred, but James Washington cheaper, and they did the famous shower narrative that Adam Levitan we talked about earlier loves so much. They did shower together in college, so maybe they'll give up. And Pete, here is the fun part, the fade of the week, the thing that people can tweet you mean things about if you're wrong. Who would be your fade of the week for week 12?
Yeah, I'll double down on my Derrick Henry fade, and I'll say you guys are all fish playing him at that ownership.
It's going to attack them back before they get you. I like that. Alex, how about you, fade of the week?
Oh, man. There's so many fades that it's hard to pick just one. But I see that Calvin Ridley is the 4th highest owned player in our ownership projections. And I know he had a really good game last week. I'm thinking that maybe going to Julio is the play here. A guy that is also fun to lose money on. So I think he's burned enough people. I'm going to fade Ridley and go with Julio.
Okay. Yeah, that's a brave take, Sid. Go to Julio Jones. Thank you for that, Alex. I'll go, man, it's tough week for fade of the week too. I don't know. I guess I'll go Michael Thomas. I don't feel great about that one, but he has had some tough times with James Bradbury in the past, and I do think they did a decent job game planning for Julio last week. So I think if you bring the same strategy, maybe we see Thomas not have quite the ceiling. His price being down makes it tough, but whatever. Yell at me about it. Michael Thomas is my fade. Pete, we love to open up the floor to our guests each week because you guys do a great job for us. We appreciate it. Plug whatever you want in the world right now. It could be Patrick Laird, could be your content for RG or for 4for4. Let the people know what you want.
Yeah, so I definitely will plug Patrick Laird's Instagram. He has this really good video of him working out on the sand dunes from when he was at University of Cal. I will plug Patrick Laird's mom has a Twitter.
That I did his mom?
Yeah. Oh, hey. No, come on. No, this is an honest plug. At Susie Laird on Twitter. I'll plug that. And then, yeah, I'm going to plug my big head-to-head GPP matchup versus Frisco Josh. I will be doing a recap of that on Roto Grinders. And yeah, been making videos for them all year. Been doing some stuff with my friend Denny Carter on 4for4. I do a high stakes fantasy football podcast for 4for4 as well called Ship Chasing. So yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, you will get access to all the Laird and various fantasy content.
Yeah, so go follow at Peter Overzet, Overzet. You can see his name on the screen right now if you are watching the video version. The Pete's a great guy, so go check him out. And Alex, as always, I want to turn it over to you before we call it quits. Anything you want to say to the fine folks before we go? You go enjoy Miami, and we go get ready for week 12.
Peter, I mean, great having you on the show here, and I hope in this head-to-head challenge versus Josh, you pick up some currency, whether it's real or Sklansky bucks. Thanks everyone for watching, of course, and thanks FantasyDraft for sponsoring the show. Main event, as many wings as I like to say it is one of my favorite tournaments in the industry because you just win more money when you play there. 1 week I finished third, and usually on other sites you don't get squat for third, but I got like 30K. That was 30% of the top prize, and that just showed. I mean, you just win more money when you win, so it's a great place to play.
So go to FantasyDraft.com, use that promo code AWESEMO. I'll be back tomorrow for Live Before Lock. Alex will be here as well in the morning doing the deeper dive. So go tune into all that content right before the slate locks tomorrow. We'll be back with you guys again soon. Enjoy your weekend. And as always, good luck.